Hi everyone, so welcome to week 13 of our course, and we are on the home stretch. So we have this week a topic next week, and one final topic on the 15th week, and then we're finished. And we are beginning our 3-week investigation of this book called Leaps of Faith by Nicholas Humphrey, author of A History of the Mind. And a little bit of background here. I've provided links to videos of Nick Humphrey lecturing, and also we'll be watching parts of a BBC program that he did in the 80s. Nick Humphrey is now retired. He was a professor of psychology at the London School of Economics, and he was also a professor of psychology at the New School for Social Research in New York City, where I had the great privilege of studying with him. And I think this holds true today, as true today as I felt this 20 years ago. He probably is the most incredible intellectual I've ever met. This man is brilliant, and not only is he brilliant, he is remarkably humble. Why do I emphasize his humility, his intellectual humility? I emphasize this because there are many books. I'm looking here at my bookshelf. There are many books written by evolutionary theorists, evolutionary psychologists on the evolutionary aspects of religious belief. And the vast majority of them by people like Sam Harris, who I would argue is an incredibly arrogant and, in my opinion, not very thorough thinker. People like Dan Dennett, who actually wrote the foreword to Humphrey's book that you're going to read. Richard Dawkins, who is notoriously arrogant and even hostile, almost has a fanaticism for his evolutionary theory. There are others, Christopher Hitchens, who was a humanities-based intellectual, who I found to be absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, he's passed away now, but I found him to be incredibly brilliant, and even in his He was so brilliant that even his sometimes arrogant, intellectually arrogant positions were forgivable, in my opinion, just because he was clearly so well thought out and so smart in the way he was thinking. I like Nick Humphrey because he's not arrogant at all. He managed to write a book about the evolutionary psychology of belief in miracles, in supernatural, in religious belief. We're not just talking about religion here, but any type of metaphysical, beyond the physical phenomenon. So things like mind reading and telling the future and bending spoons and all this sort of activities Nick Humphrey investigates in this book, and he does so without putting anyone down. When I read Daniel Dennett, the fellow who wrote a beautiful foreword to this book, and he's very famous, Daniel Dennett. When I read Dennett's book, when I read certainly Richard Dawkins, so Dennett's book is called Breaking the Spell, and this is an evolutionary critique of religious belief. Richard Dawkins' book was called The God Delusion, another evolutionary critique of religion. Chris Hitchens wrote a book called God is Not Great. Unfortunately, I couldn't bear to get through too many pages of Sam Harris's book one of his books on religious belief, just simply because I just found his thinking to be so surface level. I couldn't continue reading it, so I forget the title of the book. You can look it up if you like. And these people I'm mentioning to you are very well-known public intellectuals. They all alienate their readers because they're so hostile towards anyone who holds religious belief. Nick Humphrey doesn't do that. You will never find in this book Nick Humphrey making a disparaging remark or putting someone down for their spiritual beliefs. And that is just, to me, the mark of not only a true intellectual, but a secure and empathic and caring human being. He doesn't need to support his arguments with making personal ad hominem attacks on others for their beliefs. The amazing thing is in Daniel Dennett's book, Breaking the Spell, he says in his foreword to the book that he's writing the book to help people who have religious belief to get out of to let go of their religious belief, and then so he's telling us he writes this book for that audience, and then he goes on to really put down anyone who holds a religious belief. I don't understand why someone would do that. Nick Humphrey manages to give incredibly sound and logical explanations for phenomenon that occur, such as miracles and telling the future and ESP and bending spoons, telekinesis, and all these things. He does so without putting anyone down, and he does it in a very convincing way, and I think it's a great book for that, and it's why I selected it for our course as representative of evolutionary psychology. Okay, so you're going to see that there's some also parallels here with social psychology. So in the foreword, and you're assigned this first week to read the first 9 essays, so that's up to page 60. They're short essays, and they're really worth it. The foreword is great. So Dennett's talking about how he and a group of others were invited to do a seminar about evolutionary psychology and belief, and by ABC television, and they found themselves actually in a debate with in front of an audience. It sounded to me, as in my reading of it, that they were kind of tricked into this debate, pitting science versus the supernatural. And the Dennett and his colleagues put forth incredibly sound arguments as to why and how the phenomenon that was being investigated, such as spoon bending and mind reading and certain miracles, could be explained through scientific ways, empirically, with empirical evidence and logic. And yet, after this had been demonstrated over the course of this weekend seminar, when the audience was asked about how they felt about the supernatural after hearing the evidence, their support and belief in the supernatural actually increased rather than decreased. And that's a big part of this book. That's the social psychology. Let me give you an example of how this functions. I mean, when you read that first opening by Daniel Dennett, really think about this. Evidence is given to show how things can be explained without the need for mysticism and magic. And yet that evidence actually makes people believe more in the mysticism and magic. In social psychology, this is a very clear phenomenon that occurs. Here's an example. We learn as psychologists that when you're dealing with anyone who belongs with a cult or has any sort of a fanatic belief, the last thing you want to do is confront them and tell them they're wrong and confront their evidence. This is a sure way to make them believe their belief even more so. Why? Well, think about something that's commonly taught in, say, Pentecostal, charismatic, many of the Christian sects, and that is the idea that the holder of the true religion will come under persecution. Well, now any type of persecution or confrontation, and that confrontation, that persecution, or that evidence against is taught to be evidence that their belief is correct, and it's seen almost as if, oh, this was predicted that this would happen. Now, if you think about this, the moment if you have someone you're dealing with a very strong belief, and they believe that any type of confrontation any type of refutation of their belief is evidence that their belief is right. Every time that you refute it or argue against it, you're giving them evidence for it. And this is a social psychology function. There are many other social psychology functions that we're not covering here, but Nick Humphrey is covering in his book. But that's an example how if you're dealing with someone who's very wrapped up in an irrational or an illogical belief system, and if it's something that is causing harm in their life, and you are as a therapist are attempting to help them to come to terms with this, you cannot hit this head on. If you do, you are going to reinforce their belief. It's exactly the thing that happens if you're dealing with someone with paranoid schizophrenia. If you're in a therapy session and someone has paranoid delusions and you start doing this type of therapy where people ask them about their reality and challenge it with reality, you will get nowhere with that person, because every challenge to their perception is understood in their worldview as a trick. It's part of the paranoia, as a way of a manipulation of their belief system. So there are therapists who take this reality approach, and they're not good therapists. It doesn't work. You can't do it that way. You have to respect the belief system. You have to help the person to explore their belief system and arrive. You talk with the person and you allow them to arrive at questioning on their own. You questioning it from the outside will serve as evidence that their belief system is correct. It reinforces their belief system. So that's addressed in this foreword, and it's when we talk about psychology, this is really about the psychology of things. The first essay you're going to read, it's only a few pages long, called The Hypothesis, and it looks at how people deal with the anxieties of existence. So it's like that existential, evolutionary use of religion to come to terms with the anxieties of the unknown. It looks for the search for a soul, discusses, the search for a soul in reaction to science. So how science itself, and an emphasis on the empirical, the observational, the evidence-based, the measurable, how all of that almost fetishized in our culture actually manifests and creates a desire and a need for the metaphysical. In other words, the more observable and measurable we get, the more we create a vacuum in which that can't be filled by science. Nietzsche is the one who really proposed this. It was in the early days. When we put such an emphasis on the observation, on the observable and the measurable and the empirical, scientific and the logical, it leads an empty void in the human experience that needs to be filled. And this is something else that's discussed here, evolutionary, how religion fulfills a need in the human condition, and also the critique of parapsychology, using Occam's razor and other things, how we can come to understand parapsychology through natural science terms. Essay number two, who needs it? Who needs religious beliefs? Where are the religious beliefs from? What are they about? And what are the consequences of these beliefs? What you'll find is that people in this essay explores ideas of control, feeling safe in control, finding meaning. This is an essay that really, again, understands not only the evolution, how the evolutionary mechanism of belief evolved, the need for belief evolved, but also how and why it functions to help us survive in our environment, because that is what evolutionary theory is all about: surviving, creating an individual who's increases survivability in their given environment. Where he then goes on to his essay, Preparing for the Best, and how control and as concern for consequences increases the need for control of the natural through the supernatural, so to say through prayer, etc. It's a need for certainty. He then goes on, just amazing. I want to bring your attention to another Think Coming. Essay number 7. Definitely check out essay number 7. It's only 4 pages long, and what he's looking at here is rather remarkable. It's about how the way we look at things determine what we see, a theme that's been running through this course. And then we move to 2 great essays, number 8, Uncommon Sense, and 9, The World of a Difference. It's about affirming the belief in a desired future or reality. Again, this deals with the social psychology of belief, how the desire for being special, the desire for being something, the desire to have purpose and free will and a soul. This all leads religious belief to assist the individual in survivability. So to give some examples of this, if you would imagine the 2 goals of evolutionary process would be survivability within a given environment and passing on the genes. So in other words, getting someone else to procreate with you, make children with you. If you have a religious belief, so let's take Catholicism and many of the Christian sects. In many of the Christian sects, the belief is to go forth and be fruitful, populate the earth, spread, having as many children as possible. Another aspect of the religious belief would be the religious community helping one another out. So you have a group to go to, and you can form in this group. It creates a social cohesion, which then individuals, as we know, in this survivability and environment, is more determined evolutionary by cooperation with others than it is by individual strength. So in other words, cooperation and group cooperation trumps any type of individual strength in natural selection, in survivability and environment. So when you have religious beliefs that are encouraging having as many children as possible, right there is an evolutionary advantage. You can have an individual who believes in maybe the most fantastic spiritual beliefs and has 1 child. You have another person who is a very humanistic, existential, secular humanist, atheist, completely logical, completely scientific, and they have no children, and they're, in evolutionary terms, not a success. Success is passing on your genes. So the individual, say, that has 6, 7 children, or big, large family, because of the religious belief in not using birth control or something like this, not having abortions, etc., it actually gives an evolutionary advantage. Belonging to the church or to the group, where you have a group of people who are there to help you out when there's health issues or when there's survivability issues of economic distress or anything like this. So the social support is provided by the religious belief. The evolutionary advantage to religious belief is remarkable, and it's another thing that Humphrey explores in this text. So watch his videos on first on the placebo, remarkable. You'll get to see the man and hear him. Then go and start reading these essays. They're very thick and dense. And then finally watch the video, The Inner Eye. The first, it says part 2, but it's mislabeled. It's actually, you're watching part 1, and we'll watch more in the future. And you will hopefully get a taste for this remarkable writer and thinker, Nicholas Humphrey, and enjoy the topic.